Well, for those who are living with it, there are drugs now that afford some degree of longevity and normalcy, but those drugs come at a very high expense. And for many of the rest of us, having our health is just something that we take for granted. It's a baseline so that we can fulfill our dreams and our careers and live our lives day to day. All we're trying to do is to raise that baseline for those with HIV and AIDS so that they have the same opportunities we do. No one grows up saying, I want AIDS. They have dreams to become a doctor or a musician. And the scholarship simply helps to lay down one brick for that path for them. And what we're saying, in effect, is your dreams matter and you matter. Josh and I got to know each other at the University of Denver. Spent a lot of time off-roading in his 4Runner up to St. Mary's Glacier and talking about fast cars and mostly talking about girls. And Josh was just a normal guy. He was a great guy. He was my best friend, and he just had an atypical, unfortunate set of circumstances. The day I found out Josh was sick, I was living in Washington State, and I was actually running late for work and had my cell phone with me. And normally I wouldn't have had my phone with me going to work, but I had it that day, and I was at a stoplight, and the phone rang, and it showed Josh's name on the caller ID, and so I picked it up, but it wasn't Josh. It was a family friend saying Josh isn't going to make it through the day. And you have to understand that when we were in school, when I was still living in Colorado, whenever there was a scare, we'd rush to the hospital, and he'd be released, everything would be fine. And I thought, well, this is certainly going to be another one of those cases, but it wasn't like that at all. I got the first flight I could back to Colorado, and by the time I got to him, he was already sedated, and they were pumping him full of drugs, so as the time was going, he actually became more and more bloated and more unrecognizable. And because he was in the ICU, they were only letting one person at a time to see him, even though we knew his time was up. And I remember I was in the waiting room, and Mary came out one of the doors from his room, and she shouted down the hall. She said, "He's going, come quick." And we all filled the room. And I remember grabbing his right leg and holding him and watching the monitor. And then he passed. And that was it. I think my expectation was when I flew out from Washington to Colorado, that I'd actually be able to see him and talk to him and joke with him and just be buds again. And, to hear him laugh. And, Josh had a very contagious laugh. And I think that's the one thing, well, I mean, there's much, but that's obviously one thing we miss. It's one thing we all think about is Josh's laugh, and I still think about his laugh, and just miss his laugh. I miss him. For the time that I knew Josh, he made a big impact on my life. I mean, I think that's pretty apparent.
It's been over 15 years, and I still get upset talking about him. You know, um, like I said, it's not a place that I visit willfully um, anymore uh, because it's hard to talk about. But
the scholarship was designed with one recipient in mind, and that dollar amount was $1,000. And it's pretty attainable when you think about friends, family, and the AIDS Walk to come up with those funds. Well, what we didn't anticipate was the number of applications as people started to learn about the scholarship. So it went from, I think, maybe 2 or 3 applications the first year to over a dozen within a few years. And it became hard to say no to the majority of the people and awarding it only to one person. And granted, it's not a give me, but when you read the stories and the applications of those people, you find a way to come up with the money. So we would just amp up the efforts, and it has worked. But the problem is, I think people get burnt out, and it never grew to the point of having corporate funding. 100% of what's raised actually goes to the scholarship fund. It's not a case of administration fees take up 60%. There are no admin fees, as it were, because the cost to run the website, that's all paid for through Steve and Mary's private accounts. This is a case where it truly affects someone personally. Every penny that's raised affects somebody personally, and not a penny of that is wasted on admin fees, brochures, or whatever. That's not the case at all. If somebody wants to donate, all they have to do is go to www.joshuagomes.org, and there is a PayPal button there, and you can donate that way.